a tale of werewolves, alphas, and fated destinies, written by Olivia Stone. I should warn you, before anything else, that the night this story truly began was not gentle, nor quiet, nor forgiving, because destiny, when it decides to interfere, tends to do so with the subtlety of a lightning strike cleaving the world in two. And I remember every detail with such vivid clarity that even now I can feel the sharpness of the cold air scraping against my lungs, as though I am still running through that stone hallway, still tasting fear, still hearing the distant thunder that seemed almost sympathetic to my desperation. The moon was swollen and bright, heavy in the sky like the eye of some ancient god, watching and judging and waiting for me to either submit or break apart. And the entire fortress of Fenric Vale's pack was drenched in its pallid glow, the walls tall and cruel, as if carved with the intention of reminding every soul inside that they were small, insignificant, trapped in the iron grip of a man whose ambition had no edges and no end. I remember my silver hair, always a curse, always a beacon, trailing behind me like a comet as I moved, the strands glowing under moonlight in a way that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been the very thing that made me so unmistakable, so easy to spot, so hunted. My heart thrummed painfully as I pressed myself against the cold stone corner near the ceremonial chamber, trying to swallow the rising wave of dread that threatened to choke me, because I knew the moment I stepped into that room, the room now humming with the low chant of elders weaving the first threads of the forced bond. My life would no longer be mine, my magic no longer mine, my future no longer mine. And if there is one thing I have always understood with bone-deep certainty, it is that freedom is worth more than breath, more than blood, more than fear. The air reeked of incense, crushed moonflowers, and the metallic tang of the silver chains they had crafted specifically for me. Those cold bindings designed to smother my magic and suppress my will. And I felt anger flicker in me like a spark drifting toward dry brush, threatening to ignite something far too dangerous. I knew I could not allow that to happen, not yet, because every guard in the fortress was on edge, their senses heightened by the moon and the anticipation of the ritual. And if I flared too brightly, too soon, they would swarm me before I even reached the outer gates. But destiny, cruel and theatrical as ever, seemed determined to force my hand, because the moment I eased away from the corner, I heard the approaching footsteps, measured, heavy, familiar in a way that made my breath catch. Lord Fenric Vale himself, accompanied by 2 elite trackers, was coming down the hall, his voice smooth and confident as he said, "She will not run. Fear makes her cooperative. Bring her." I could have remained frozen. I could have given in to the shaking of my limbs, the trembling of my fingers, but something hot and fierce surged through me, something like defiance, or maybe the last wild flutter of a dying bird refusing to surrender, and I bolted. The sudden movement sent a loud echo ricocheting down the corridor, and Fenric's voice snapped like a whip. "There! Get her!" The trackers lunged, but I was already sprinting, bare feet slapping against the polished stone floor, breath slicing in and out of my lungs as I pushed myself harder than I ever had, weaving through side passages and storage alcoves, my thoughts blurring into a single, pulsating mantra. Not me, not tonight, not like this. When the next turn revealed a row of tall ceremonial windows, the storm outside flashing against the sky, something inside me responded instinctively, as if the wind, my oldest friend and most unpredictable ally, was calling to me, urging me forward, offering me a chance. I slammed my palms against the metal frame, forcing my magic into my hands, even though the silver chains still looped around my wrists burned painfully, resisting the flow. But desperation has a way of overriding even the most restrictive barriers. With a gasp that felt like tearing, a burst of wind exploded outward, shattering the latch and flinging the window wide. Cold air rushed inward, swirling around me as if greeting me, recognizing me, and in that moment I felt a sliver of hope, thin and fragile, but real enough to clutch with shaking fingers. I climbed onto the ledge, ignoring the shouts behind me, ignoring the sting of metal digging into my skin, and I leapt into the storm. The world became a blur of rain and darkness and rushing wind. The fall long enough that I wondered, briefly, if I had misjudged the height, if this choice would end me before the bond ever could. But then the wind caught me, guiding my descent, slowing my impact just enough that when I hit the sloped roof of one of the outer buildings, it hurt. Yes, but it didn't kill me. Pain radiated through my side as I slid down the roof tiles, scrambling to keep my grip, finally dropping onto the muddy ground below, where my legs nearly buckled. I forced myself forward, stumbling into the forest beyond the fortress walls, every breath a razor inside my chest, every step a battle between survival and collapse. Branches clawed at my arms, the silver chains dragging like anchors, but I kept moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant a bond that would strip me of everything that made me Ayla Seren. By the time the forest thinned and the lanterns of Aurelia's outskirts flickered in the distance, my lungs burned, my muscles trembled, and my mind felt stretched thin. But I had made it, barely, unbelievably, to a place where Fenric's influence was weaker, where crowds might hide me, where I could disappear for at least a few precious moments. The night market was alive despite the weather. The smell of spiced pastries, roasted meats, and wet cobblestone mixing in a strangely comforting blend, and I slipped into the flow of people. Hood pulled low over my shimmering hair, trying to look ordinary even as I trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline. But I sensed them before I saw them. The trackers, fanning out through the market, their predatory focus slicing through the crowd like blades. Panic surged again, my throat tightening as my gaze darted desperately from face to face, searching for something, someone, anything that could help me disappear. And that was when I saw him. A tall man with short silver hair that somehow, impossibly, mirrored the shade of my own, though his was cropped nearer to his jaw and glinted like forged moonsteel in the lantern light. And there was something about him, something steady, something dangerously calm, something that told me he did not belong among these vendors and travelers and common folk, something that whispered of power carefully leashed beneath a quiet surface. His eyes were a molten gold silver, ancient and assessing, and when they slid toward me, even before I reached him, I felt the air around him shift, as if the world itself paused in acknowledgement. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I simply acted because instinct screamed that if I didn't anchor myself to someone, anyone, the trackers would tear me from the crowd, drag me back to the fortress, and force me into a bond that would destroy me. So I grabbed him. My fingers curled into the fabric of his cloak, my body pressed against his in a desperate approximation of intimacy, and I whispered with trembling urgency, "Please, just pretend you're my mate." For a single heartbeat, the man didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink, as if my sudden intrusion had shocked him into stillness. But then something extraordinary happened. The air around him deepened, thickened, pulsed, not violently but with slow, immense pressure that felt like standing too close to a thunderstorm. and his arm slid around my waist in one fluid, controlled motion that felt more like a claim than a favor. His gaze swept over my face, searching, recognizing something I didn't understand. And then he lowered his head slightly, brushing his cheek against my hair in a gesture so intimate and so unmistakably wolf-like that my breath stuttered. A subtle wave of scent rolled outward from him, warm and rich and undeniably alpha. The trackers froze mid-step. I felt it, felt their confusion, their hesitation, their sudden fear, as they sensed the aura surrounding the man I'd latched onto. They scanned the area, their eyes narrowing, their bodies stiffening, and then, as though reevaluating the risk of pursuing me past the boundary of this stranger's presence, they backed away. Not far, not defeated, but deterred. For now. When they finally vanished back into the density of the market, the man's arm didn't move, and neither did I, because for several long moments I was simply trying to catch my breath. Trying to understand what I had done and why he had allowed it, why he had played along with such precision. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet and smooth, but with an edge of command hidden beneath the calm. "You're going to explain," he murmured, not as a question, but as an inevitability. I swallowed hard, the weight of exhaustion settling heavily over me, the adrenaline fading into a trembling aftermath that left my limbs weak. I needed help. They were going to take me back. I didn't know what else to do. He tilted his head slightly, studying me as though he were peeling back layers. "And you thought grabbing the first man you saw was a wise strategy?" "It was either that or die," I whispered, and something in my voice apparently shifted something in him, because his expression softened. Not much, but enough for me to notice. He exhaled slowly, and though his arm loosened, it did not fall away entirely. "You are hurt," he said, his gaze flicking to the raw, reddened marks on my wrists, where the silver had burned into skin. "And you are running from something, or someone." I nodded, unable to form words around the lump in my throat. "What is your name?" he asked. I hesitated, because names have power, especially among werewolves, especially when exchanged under duress. But something in his steady golden gaze made me feel, if not safe, then at least suspended in a moment where safety was possible. "Ayla," I breathed. "Ayla Seren." A shadow crossed his expression, subtle but unmistakable, as if the name meant something to him, or to the world he belonged to. He stepped back slightly, enough to look directly into my face. "Ayla Seren," he repeated softly, and I felt a strange shiver ripple through the air at the sound of my full name on his tongue. "You should come with me." I stiffened, panic returning instantly. "No, I just needed cover. I can disappear again. I won't bother you." "You misunderstand," he said gently, though steel lingered beneath the softness. "If those trackers were the first wave, the next will be stronger. You will not survive alone tonight. Come with me." I stared at him, torn between suspicion and the undeniable truth that my body was close to collapsing. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you help me?" His answer was delayed, as though he was weighing something immense, something dangerous, and when he spoke, his voice dipped into a quiet intensity that made the hair on my arms lift. "Because you don't know it yet," he said. "But the reason they're hunting you concerns me far more than you can imagine." A cold tremor slid through my spine. "You know why?" I breathed. "Yes," he replied, eyes gleaming with a secret that made my pulse race. "And if you want to live long enough to understand the truth, you will follow me now." His cloak shifted in the wind, revealing the faintest trace of a crest embroidered near his shoulder, a crescent moon intertwined with a wolf's sigil. And though I didn't recognize it fully, something deep in my gut told me it was important, ancient, dangerous. And in that moment, as the storm thrashed overhead and the distant howl of a hunting horn echoed through the night, I realized with a sinking, terrifying clarity that I had not grabbed an ordinary man. I had stumbled into the path of someone far more powerful, someone with secrets that could reshape everything I thought I knew, someone who might be the only shield between me and the bond I had nearly died to escape. And as he turned away from the crowded market, expecting me to follow, I felt a chilling certainty settle in my bones. Whatever awaited me in the shadows of his world would be as perilous as what I fled, perhaps even more so. But I followed anyway, because survival leaves little room for hesitation, and as I stepped into the darkness beside him, I sensed, without understanding, that my life was now entwined with a destiny far larger than my own, a destiny that would reveal itself soon. I wish I could tell you that following the silver-haired stranger into the deeper shadows of Aurelia was the result of some grand, courageous decision, or that I stepped after him with the effortless confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, where she was going, and why trusting a man she had met only minutes before wasn't the most reckless possible choice I could have made. But the truth, raw, bitter, unpolished, is that I followed him because I was exhausted down to the marrow of my bones, trembling from adrenaline and cold, my wrists burning from the silver restraints that still bit into my skin. And I felt the presence of Fenric's hunters pressing at the edges of the night like wolves waiting for the moment I faltered. So I clung to the stranger's steady gait, as if it were the last thread holding me above a dark and endless abyss. He moved with a quiet confidence that suggested he knew this city far better than he claimed, weaving through narrow alleys and side streets as though he were part of the night itself. And I tried, God's help me, I tried to keep up with him without stumbling, though my legs threatened to collapse beneath me with every uneven cobblestone, every sudden turn, every burst of cold wind that scraped past my skin like invisible claws, dragging along open wounds. The rain had grown heavier, soaking through the thin fabric of my cloak until it clung to me like a second skin, and I watched the stranger's silver hair grow damp, the strands darkening slightly, though the metallic sheen never fully dulled, glowing faintly under the scattered lanterns, as if the moon itself followed him no matter how narrow the street or how thick the shadows. We didn't speak, not at first, because there was a tension coiling around us, thick, unspoken, electric, and I could sense an undercurrent of awareness in him, a wariness not directed at me, exactly, but at the world around us, as though he expected danger to spring from every doorway, every alley, every shuttered window we passed. And I found myself wondering, with a flicker of unease, what kind of man lived with that level of vigilance woven so tightly into his bones. Eventually, when the market noise had faded and the narrow streets opened into a quieter district, where the air smelled faintly of pine resin and mountain stone, he finally slowed, turning his head just enough that the lantern light caught the sharp line of his jaw and the strange silver gold of his eyes. "Are you hurt anywhere other than your wrists?" he asked, his voice low, steady, infuriatingly calm for a man who had just pretended to be my mate in front of deadly trackers. I didn't answer right away, partly because my pride flared. Small, stubborn, bruised, and partly because I didn't want to admit how badly my side ached from hitting the sloped roof after my desperate leap from Fenric's fortress. But when I didn't respond, he glanced fully at me, and those eyes of his saw too much, cutting through my feeble attempts at composure as if they were no more solid than mist. "You're limping," he said, not accusing or demanding, only stating an observation with disarming matter-of-factness. "Sit." He pointed to a covered alcove carved into the stone wall of a small bakery long since closed for the night. "I'm fine," I lied, or tried to lie, because the moment I attempted to walk past him, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through my ribs, and I nearly folded in half before I could hide the grimace. He caught my elbow in a firm but gentle grip, guiding me toward the alcove with an ease that suggested he was used to handling stubborn, exhausted wolves who thought pretending strength was the same as survival. "Sit," he repeated, and this time I obeyed, not because he ordered it, but because my body could no longer pretend it wasn't falling apart. The rain softened slightly, tapping softly against the stone arch above us, and my breath came in uneven shivers as I leaned back and tried not to wince. The stranger crouched in front of me, his cloak falling open just enough to reveal a glimpse of the embroidered crest I had noticed earlier. The one I still couldn't place, but suspected was far more significant than he intended me to know. He lifted one of my wrists, turning it over to examine the angry red burns where the silver chains had seared into my skin. "These restraints are designed for high magic wolves," he murmured, tracing the marks with a feather-light touch that somehow made the pain sharper. "Who put them on you?" I swallowed, my throat tight with the memory of Fenric's cold smile inches from my face as he fastened the chains himself. "Fenric," I whispered. "Lord Fenric Vale." The stranger's eyes hardened, the silver within them sharpening like a blade drawn from its sheath. "And he means to force a bond on you." It wasn't a question, and hearing the truth stated aloud, hearing it in someone else's voice, made something in me crack, because it meant I wasn't imagining the nightmare. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't losing my mind. I was in real, imminent danger. "Yes," I breathed, my voice cracking at the edges. "He does." The stranger studied me for one long, tense moment, his expression unreadable, and then he straightened, pulling a small leather pouch from within his cloak. "Hold out your arm." I hesitated, instinctively recoiling from another command, but the moment I met his gaze, I saw no malice, no possession, no hunger for power, only focus and something that might have been concern, though he hid it well. Reluctantly, I extended my arm, and he sprinkled a fine, silver-gray powder across the burns. It hissed softly as it touched my skin, releasing a faint herbal scent that reminded me of winter mint and crushed leaves. "It will cool the burns and help neutralize the silver residue," he said, his voice softer now. "It won't heal everything, but it will help you walk without fainting." My lips parted. "You carry supplies for treating silver burns?" "Among other things," he replied cryptically. I watched him in silence, watched the efficient movements of his hands, watched the way the rain slid down his cheekbones without seeming to bother him in the slightest, and I felt the tension in my chest tighten, not because I feared him exactly, but because I couldn't understand him. He was clearly powerful, alarmingly so, and yet he had stepped between me and Fenric's hunters without hesitation. He had protected me, tended to my wounds, and now stood guard over me as though I were something fragile or precious or worth saving. And that contradiction unsettled me far more deeply than any threat I had faced tonight. Finally, when he finished tending to my wrists, He sat beside me beneath the alcove's shelter, exhaling long and slow, as though bracing himself for a conversation he didn't particularly want to have. "You should tell me why Fenric wants you," he said at last, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Because, whatever the reason is, it is far more dangerous than you think." A tremor ran through me, not from the cold, but from the heavy truth I had been carrying for years, a truth I had never spoken aloud, not even to myself. "He wants my bloodline," I whispered, each word scraping up like shards of glass. "He wants to use the bond to gain access to my magic." The stranger did not react immediately, but the air around him shifted, barely perceptible, but enough that I sensed the storm beneath his calm surface. "Your bloodline," he repeated slowly, "is rare." "Yes." "Dormant," he added. "Yes. And immensely powerful if awakened." A pause, a tightening of his jaw. And then, in a softer, darker voice, "Fenric is planning something." "He's planning to overthrow the Alpha King," I said, the words tasting like poison, though they were not new to me. But the stranger, to my utter shock, went completely still, as if the world around him had abruptly ceased to exist. And then his eyes lifted to mine, burning with a mixture of disbelief and fury that made my breath freeze. "Fenric told you this?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I overheard him speaking to his advisors. They want to use me to create a dominion bond, one that would amplify Fenric's power enough to challenge the throne." The stranger leaned back slightly, closing his eyes as if steadying himself, and when he opened them again, the softness had vanished entirely, replaced by something sharp and unknowable. "You should have told me earlier," he murmured, not reprimanding, but certain. I bristled. "I don't even know you." "You know enough to realize you are in grave danger," he countered. There was something in his tone, something quiet, ancient, heavy with authority, that struck me with a startling familiarity, though I couldn't place it. And before I could ask what he meant, he rose to his feet and held out a hand. "We have to move," he said. "Now." "Move where?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "To somewhere safe." "There is no safe place," I whispered, shaking my head. "Fenric will find me anywhere." "Not where I'm taking you," he said softly, and there was a certainty in his voice that made my breath catch. "Why?" I asked, the question trembling out of me. "Why are you helping me? Why risk yourself for someone you don't know?" He hesitated, not long, but long enough that I understood the truth he was about to speak carried weight, danger, and consequence. When he finally answered, his voice dropped to a low, almost reluctant murmur. "Because Fenric's choice of victim was no accident," he said. "Because your bloodline is more than rare. It is tied directly to the throne. And because if Fenric gains control of you, he gains control of something far older and far more powerful than any alpha in this kingdom should possess." I stared at him, stunned, breathless. What do you mean?" His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a truth that made the world tilt under my feet. "I mean," he said slowly, "that the blood in your veins was once bound to the crown, and that if Fenric succeeds, he will not just challenge the throne, he will control it." Something cold and heavy crashed into my chest. "The Alpha King," I whispered. "He would be able to—" "Overthrow him," the stranger finished quietly, "and the kingdom would plunge into war." My heart pounded, my pulse racing, my mind spinning as 1,000 questions surged through me. But before I could speak any of them, a sudden, distant howl split the air, a long, chilling sound that carried through the streets like a warning from the darkness itself. The stranger's head snapped up, eyes narrowing, his entire body shifting into a stance that radiated readiness, power, and lethal intent. "They've found our trail," he said. Another howl answered the first, closer this time, far too close. I tensed. "What do we do?" He turned to me, his expression fierce and resolute, and for the first time, he let a flicker of something unrestrained, something primal, illuminate his silver-gold eyes. "You run with me," he said, "and you do not look back." Before I could respond, he took my hand in a firm grip, pulling me out of the alcove just as a third howl erupted, this one so close it vibrated in my bones, and as we sprinted into the shadowed streets, rain crashing around us and the storm roaring overhead, I realized with chilling certainty that whatever hunted us now was far more dangerous than the trackers from the market. And when a massive shadow lunged across a rooftop above us, its eyes glowing with unnatural crimson light, the stranger jerked me sharply to the side, his voice slicing through the chaos with a single, terrifying command. "Get behind me, now!" I stumbled back, breath catching, because in that moment, as he stepped forward and the stormlight illuminated the full force of the aura, he no longer bothered to hide. I understood. He wasn't just powerful. He wasn't just dangerous. He wasn't just a stranger. He was something else entirely. And as the monstrous shape leapt toward us, claws extended, the stranger's silver hair flaring like a banner in the storm, he spoke a single word that made my blood freeze: Fenric. But the thing attacking us was not Fenric. It was worse. And as the creature struck and the stranger unleashed a burst of ancient alpha power that rattled the stones beneath my feet, I realized something devastatingly clear. Whoever this man truly was, he had just blown open the first crack in the secret he had been so carefully hiding, and the truth waiting behind it was going to change everything. If you have ever felt the world tilt beneath your feet, not from falling, not from weakness, but from the sudden and overwhelming realization that everything you believed about yourself, your past, your place in the vast and tangled web of fate, was only a fraction of the truth, then perhaps you will understand how I felt in the exact moment when the creature lunged at us in the rain-drenched streets of Aurelia and Kale, no longer hiding the terrible, breathtaking magnitude of his power, stepped between me and the oncoming death as though he had been born for this one purpose alone. Kale, because I finally knew his name, spoken like a storm held inside a single breath, moved with a fluid, devastating grace, his silver hair whipping behind him, his aura blazing with such raw, ancient force that the air seemed to warp around him, bending in deference to a king who no longer cared to hide his crown. And I watched in something between awe and terror as he caught the monstrous, wolf-like abomination mid-strike, slamming it into the cobblestones with a crack that echoed through the narrow street like a thunderclap. The creature writhed, snarling with a feral savagery that was nothing like a natural wolf. Its eyes were glowing, corrupted with blood magic, its limbs twisted as though reshaped by hands that understood neither mercy nor restraint. And when Kale tore it off him and flung it into the opposite wall with terrifying ease, a sickening realization struck me like a blade between the ribs. Fenric had used my bloodline's dormant magic to create abominations even before the ritual was complete, experimenting on his own pack, twisting them into weapons to wield in his coming war. Kale's voice, low and thunderous, snapped through the storm. "Ayla, stay behind me." I wanted to argue. I wanted to fight beside him, to show that I was not some fragile thing to be shielded. But the truth was that my body trembled, not with fear alone, but with the weight of a destiny I had never asked for. And I knew in that moment that Kale wasn't trying to undermine my strength. He was protecting something precious, something tied not just to me, but to the balance of the entire Lyrian kingdom. Still, I couldn't simply watch. As the creature staggered up, bones cracking, bloodlight pulsing through its veins, Kale stepped forward to intercept it. But then another figure emerged from the far end of the street. A tall silhouette framed by rain and lightning, his cloak snapping in the wind like the wings of a carrion bird, and even before my brain processed his face, my body recognized him with instinctive dread. Fenric. His smile was thin and venomous, as if carved rather than grown, and his dark eyes gleamed with a kind of triumphant madness that made my skin crawl. "You run so beautifully, Ayla," he called over the sound of the storm, his voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "Even now, even here, you glow like something the gods left behind." Kyle stepped half a pace in front of me, his aura flaring so fiercely that the rain around him evaporated in a fine mist, and when he spoke, the ground seemed to hum in response. "You will not touch her." Fenric tilted his head in mock pity, though his eyes glinted coldly. "Ah, so the Alpha King finally reveals himself." Alpha King. The words rang like a living thing inside my skull. I had suspected, I had feared. But hearing it aloud, hearing Fenric spit the title with such bitter, hungry hatred, made the truth condense around us like the heart of a storm. Kale did not deny it, nor soften it, nor glance back at me for permission or understanding. He simply stood there, tall and terrible and magnificent in his wrath, and I suddenly understood why the air bent around him, why the trackers had fled, why the very shadows recoiled from him. Fenric's smile widened. "So you hid among the common folk, wrapped in plain clothes, thinking you could root out my little plans without ever being seen. Tell me, Majesty, how does it feel to be dragged into the mud by a scrap of silver-haired nothing?" Kale moved so fast I didn't see the motion until the shockwave hit me, rattling through my bones. He was suddenly in front of Fenric, hand wrapped around the traitor's throat, lifting him off the ground like he weighed no more than a piece of discarded cloth. "Do not," Kale growled, his voice reverberating in the stones beneath us. "Speak her name with your poison-stained mouth." Fenric's corrupted wolf snarled, launching itself at Kale from behind, but I reacted instinctively, thrusting out my hand as though I had always known how to wield the storm and wind that trembled beneath my skin, and a fierce gust, wild, uncontrolled, yet devastating, slammed the creature into the wall, the impact sending cracks spider-webbing across the stone. Kale's head snapped toward me, eyes widening briefly, not with fear, but with something like wonder, and in that moment, something in me unfurled, something deep and thunderous and ancient, as if my magic, suppressed and starved for years, finally recognized the world it had been meant to inhabit. Fenric, even with Kyle's hand tightening around his throat, laughed, the sound bubbling with dark satisfaction. "Look how it awakens in her," he hissed. "Look at the power you could have had, Majesty, if you had simply claimed her before I did." Kale's fingers tightened and Fenric choked, but even as the Alpha King's strength pressed in, the traitor lifted a hand, revealing a shard of blood crystal pulsing with a sickly red light. "You cannot stop the ritual now," Fenric rasped. "Her bloodline is already bound to mine." My heart stuttered. Kale snarled. "Lies." Fenric's smile was a razor. "Then watch." The shard blazed crimson. I felt something wrench inside my chest, like invisible claws dragging through the core of my being, pulling, tearing, binding without permission or consent, and a scream tore out of me before I could stop it. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my ribs as the world exploded into light and sound and agony. Cale dropped Fenric immediately, rushing to me, his hands gripping my shoulders with frantic desperation. "Ayla! Look at me! Stay with me! Ayla!" But the magic was ripping through me in violent waves, pulling at my bloodline, scraping at my soul, trying to bind me to Fenric through the fragment of a ritual he had begun but never completed. I tasted blood, salt, and fear, and the world blurred at the edges. Fenric staggered to his feet, coughing but smiling, always smiling. "You see? She is already mine. Even the Alpha King cannot break a bond once it begins." Cale turned, eyes burning with a fury so intense the storm itself seemed to recoil. "Yes," he whispered, voice trembling with restrained violence. "I can." Before Fenric could react, Cale reached out, seizing my trembling hands, and pressed my palms to his chest, right over his heart. "Ayla," he breathed, every word thick with a truth older than crowns or bonds or feuds. "This ends with you choosing." My voice fractured. "I can't. I'm not strong enough." "Yes," Cale said, leaning closer, his forehead touching mine, his voice a low, steady roar inside the storm. "You are, Ayla. I have seen your strength, felt it, watched it rise from nothing but ash and desperation, and you are the only one who can sever his hold." Fenric shouted something unintelligible, the blood crystal pulsing violently, its power clawing at my chest again. But Cale's hands tightened around mine, anchoring me, grounding me. "Choose," he murmured. "Choose freedom. Choose yourself." Something inside me, something buried, ancient, fierce, answered. I felt the wind surge around us, curling into a vortex that wrapped itself around my silver hair, lifting it like a banner of stormlight. And the pain threatening to split me apart suddenly redirected, channeling instead into my palms, into Cale's heartbeat, into the space between us. A crack split the air. Fenric screamed. The blood crystal fractured, splitting into 3 jagged shards. Light exploded outward. When the world settled, rain falling again, stones trembling beneath us, the storm peeling back into a quiet rumble. Fenric lay unconscious, his corrupted creature disintegrated into dust, and Cale, breath ragged, arms still around me, stared with something like awe. "You broke it," he whispered. "You, Ayla Seren, broke an uncompleted dominion bond." "I didn't," I said, swallowing hard. "Not alone." He held my gaze with such intensity that my chest tightened. "You chose," he repeated, "and that is all that mattered." Guards arrived minutes later. Cale's loyal soldiers, men who bowed the instant they recognized their king. And Fenric was bound, magic suppressed, hauled away to face judgment for treason, corruption, and forbidden rituals. The aftermath blurred, Cale lifting me gently, carrying me through the storm. Healers tending to my wounds. The palace gates opening like the jaws of a legend. But my mind stayed fixed on one truth. The war Fenric wanted to start had been halted, but something far deeper had been set in motion. Days passed, slowly, yet somehow too fast, and the kingdom began to mend. Cale moving through the palace with the quiet certainty of a man who understood both the weight of his crown and the cost of the truth he now carried. He kept me close, never pushing, never assuming, but always there, a presence steady enough to shift the trajectory of my world. And on the final night before the council's verdict was announced, we stood together on the highest balcony overlooking Aurelia, the wind cool against our faces, the moon low and luminous, and Kale spoke with a softness I had never heard from him. "You changed everything," he said, "not just for the kingdom, for me." I breathed in slowly, letting the wind curl around us. "And you saved me." He shook his head, stepping closer, silver hair glowing in the moonlight. "No, Ayla, you saved yourself. I only stood beside you." Silence stretched between us, not empty, not tense, but full of meaning, full of something like possibility, and I felt the faint echo of the bond that had formed in the storm, unforced, unbidden, yet undeniably real, a connection woven not of domination, but choice. "Kale," I whispered, "what happens now?" He smiled, softly, rarely, beautifully. "Whatever you want," he said, "whatever you choose." And in that moment, with the city spread out before us and the moon hanging like a promise above our heads, I realized the truth that had been quietly growing inside me since the night we met in the crowded market. Fate may have thrown us together in chaos and fear, but the rest, every step forward, was ours to shape. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of snow and pine and something warm that curled beneath my ribs, and I leaned into Kale's side, feeling, for the first time in years, not hunted, not bound, not powerless, but whole. The kingdom had been saved. The traitor had fallen. The future, uncertain, vast, terrifying, waited, and I was ready to walk into it, not alone, but beside the Alpha King whose path had collided with mine in the most chaotic, beautiful, destiny-shattering way imaginable. And though our story had reached its final chapter, it felt, with startling certainty, like the beginning of something even greater. If I had known that walking into the palace courtyard at Kale's side would feel like stepping into the mouth of a legend, one carved long before either of us was born, I might have paused at the threshold, taken one last careful breath, and prepared myself the way a warrior does before facing a battlefield. But truth has a habit of arriving before you are ready for it, heavy and unyielding, and so I entered, without preparation, without armor, without any understanding of how deeply this place would mark me. The courtyard was carved from pale stone that shimmered in the moonlight, each tile etched with symbols from ancient rites, long forgotten by most wolves, but preserved in the memory of kings. Frost dusted the edges of the path despite the mild night air, as though Winterfang, Kale's ancestral seat, refused to let go of its devotion to ice and wind. Torches burned along the walls in tall silver sconces, and the flames flickered with a strange blue hue, casting ethereal shadows that made the courtyard feel alive, aware, listening. Kyle walked beside me in complete silence, though his hand hovered near mine as if he wanted to take it, but wasn't certain I would allow the closeness. He held himself with the quiet control of a man who could collapse mountains with a word, but preferred not to. His power radiated from him like slow-moving lightning, subtle but impossible to ignore. I sensed how the palace responded to him, the way the torch flames leaned subtly in his direction, the way the air grew denser, the way the stone beneath our feet hummed faintly, as if the very walls recognized their king. But when Kyle looked at me, all of that power softened, narrowing into something gentle, focused, achingly human. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said quietly, his breath curling in the cold air. "The council will wait. They owe you that after what you've endured." I shook my head. If I wait, fear will twist it into something heavier. Better to face them now. Kale's expression flickered with something. Worry, perhaps, or pride. "Then I'll stand with you." "You already are," I wanted to say. "You always have, even when you didn't know me." But before I could speak, the great doors leading into the Hall of Verdicts groaned open, and a dim, cool light spilled across the courtyard stones, inviting us in, or warning us. The Hall of Verdicts was unlike the palace's other chambers. Where the throne room was carved from obsidian and inlaid with gold, and the library carried the scent of old parchment and polished cedar, this hall felt ancient in a different way. Older than Kale's bloodline, older than the kingdom, older even than the magic in my veins. The ceiling arched high above us, disappearing into darkness thick enough to swallow sound. 12 stone pillars, each carved with a different crest representing the founding packs, lined the length of the hall, and at the far end, a semicircle of raised seats awaited the council. Above them, etched into the wall, was a single phrase in old Lyrian script. Truth binds deeper than blood. As Kale and I stepped inside, the echo of our footsteps bounced against the vast emptiness, sounding far too loud. I pulled my cloak tighter around myself, though not from cold. My stomach churned with unease, the kind that comes not from danger, but from being seen. When the council finally entered, robes billowing, expressions measured, I felt each gaze flick toward me with the clinical sharpness of dissecting knives. I had known they would be curious, suspicious, even wary, but I had not expected the weight of their attention to feel like a collar around my throat. Kale must have sensed it because he shifted slightly, placing himself just enough in front of me to shield me from their full scrutiny without making the gesture obvious. A silent promise, a careful shield, a small comfort. Counselor Elise, a sharp-eyed woman whose silver hair fell to her waist, stepped forward. "Isla Seren," she said, voice ringing through the hall with the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Daughter of the Windborn line, survivor of Fenric Vale's treason, you stand before this council to answer one question." Kale cut in smoothly, his tone cool enough to freeze breath, midair. "To provide testimony. She stands here as a witness, not a defendant." Elise bowed her head. "Of course, Majesty." But something in her tone told me she disapproved, either of Kale's interruption or of my presence, or both. "Please," she said, "step forward." Kyle remained beside me as I moved. I appreciated the gesture more than I could express. "Isla Seren," Counselor Marrow, a broad-shouldered man with storm-gray eyes, began. "Tell us in your own words how Fenric attempted to use your bloodline to claim the throne." I inhaled slowly. The memory still felt like a bruise pressed too hard, so I told them. I spoke of silver chains, of corridors and chanting elders, of a window shattered by desperate wind. I told them of the trackers in the market, of the first time I touched Kale's cloak and begged him to pretend. I described the corrupted creature, the blood crystal shard, the pain that had torn through me when Fenric tried to bind me against my will, and I told them how I broke it. When I finished, the hall fell into a silence made of ice and breath. Counselor Elise leaned back in her seat, steepling her fingers. "Your bloodline," she said slowly, "was believed lost generations ago. That Fenric found you?" "He did not find her," Kale said sharply. "He hunted her." "And you believe," Counselor Marrow said cautiously, "that Fenric intended to use the Dominion Bond to overthrow the throne." Kale's voice chilled further. "Fenric confessed as much when I confronted him." Elise nodded. "He will face sentence tomorrow, but tonight," her eyes flicked to me, "we must determine whether Isla Seren is a danger." Kyle stiffened. My breath caught. "A danger?" I echoed. Counselor Elise's gaze was not unkind, merely piercing. "Your magic has been suppressed for years, It is awakening unpredictably. You shattered a blood-forged bond. You destroyed a creature enhanced by forbidden rituals. Such power is volatile. I'm not dangerous, I said quietly. Not intentionally, Elise clarified. But magic does not need intent to cause harm. You are a force the kingdom has not seen in centuries. A murmur rippled across the council. Kyle stepped forward, voice low and deadly. She is under my protection. Elise met his gaze evenly. Even kings cannot protect the realm from threats they do not understand. She is not a threat, Kale growled. She is the reason this kingdom still stands. Silence fell again, this time heavier, colder, and then Counselor Marrow exhaled slowly. We ask only one thing, Majesty. Let us assess her, not to chain her, not to restrain her, merely to understand the extent of her awakening magic. Kale turned to me, eyes searching. Your choice, always giving me that, always letting me decide. I swallowed hard. What would the assessment involve? Counselor Elise gestured to the floor between the pillars. Nothing invasive, a resonance test. It simply measures the stability of your core magic. If it proves balanced, you will be free to move about the palace without restriction. And if it isn't balanced? I asked. Elise hesitated. Then we will take steps to ensure you learn control. Steps, Kyle repeated, voice dangerously quiet. Will be agreed upon by me. A silent standoff stretched between them until Elise finally nodded. I inhaled deeply. My magic pulsed faintly beneath my skin. Restless, but not wild. Strong, yes, but not unmoored. Not broken. I'll do it, I said. Kale's jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he moved to stand behind me, close enough that the heat of his presence steadied me. Counselor Elise motioned. Step into the center. I obeyed. The moment my foot touched the inner ring, the hall darkened. The pillars glowed faintly, threads of blue light weaving upward like vines of starlight. The ancient sigils carved into the floor brightened beneath my feet, reacting to the bloodline in my veins. Kyle tensed behind me, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. Isla Seren, Elise called. Focus on your heartbeat, nothing more. So I did. My heart thrummed steadily. Then, a pulse of wind curled around my ankles. A soft hum vibrated through the floor. A faint glow began to form around my body. Silver, like moonlit frost, threaded with strands of pale gold. Gasps echoed among the council. The resonance glyphs beneath my feet brightened, shifting, reshaping, and to my surprise, the wind around me lifted, gentle as a whispered promise, swirling upward and carrying the glow with it until I stood within a soft column of silver-gold light. Not chaotic, not violent, not unstable. Just alive, balanced. When the light faded, the hall fell silent. Counselor Marrow leaned forward. The line is strong, he murmured, awe coloring his voice. Stronger than recorded. Elise's expression had shifted too. Not fear, but something like reluctant respect. Her magic is stable, controlled, unbound by corruption. Kyle exhaled sharply, tension bleeding from his frame. Elise stood. Isla Seren, you are free to remain within the palace as long as you wish. You are welcome here. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement, no crown placed upon my head. But somehow, this acknowledgement felt heavier, more meaningful, because it wasn't given. It was earned. Winter settled over the kingdom in the weeks that followed, frosting rooftops and glazing the palace towers with glittering ice. Snow fell often, softly most days, violently others, and I learned quickly that Winterfang lived up to its name. Yet the cold never bothered me. Something in my bloodline, perhaps, or the lingering resonance of that night in the hall kept my magic warm within my skin. Kale was busier than ever. Council meetings, diplomatic negotiations, interrogations regarding Fenric's inner circle. But he always found me, sometimes in the quiet corners of the library, sometimes on the arching balconies overlooking the training grounds, sometimes in the gardens where frost-bitten flowers bloomed unnaturally whenever I passed. And every time he found me, he paused. Not long, just a breath, and something in his expression shifted, softened, warmed, as though seeing me rewrote something in him. One evening, deep into winter's heart, he found me in the west courtyard, where the wind carried the scent of pine and distant snowstorms. The moon hung low, full and bright, painting silver across the stones. "Ayla," he said softly. I turned. "You look tired." He smiled faintly. "I am." "Long day?" "A long month," he corrected, stepping closer. "Fenric's trial concluded today. And life imprisonment in the Iron Keep. His magic suppressed. He won't hurt anyone again." I nodded, tension I hadn't realized I still held loosening in my shoulders. Kale exhaled and looked up at the moon, silver hair catching its glow. "There is something else." His tone made my heart stutter. "What is it?" He faced me fully, eyes luminous. "The council wants to formalize your protection. Officially. Publicly." My breath shortened. "What does that mean?" "That you would join the king's inner circle," Kale said quietly. "As an advisor, a magical guardian, a representative of the Windborn line." I blinked. That sounds like a lot of responsibility for someone who didn't know she was a Windborn 2 months ago. His smile widened slightly. "You've handled more in far less time." I looked away, the wind tugging gently at my hair. "Do you want me to accept?" Silence. Then, "Ayla," Kyle said softly, "I want many things, but what you choose must be yours alone." His voice, God's his voice, held something that wrapped around my ribs like warm fingers. I turned slowly, and he stepped closer, close enough that our breath mingled in the cold air. "Ayla Seren," he murmured, eyes molten silver gold. "Whatever future you want, I will support it. Whether you stay in this palace or walk your own path. Whether you stand at my side in council chambers or roam the free winds of the world. As long as you live your life by choice, not fear." Emotion caught in my throat, thick and warm. I reached up, brushing my fingers along the edge of his jaw. "And if what I choose is to stay, not for power, not for duty, but because you're here?" His breath hitched, the smallest sound but honest. Then he rested his forehead against mine. "Then," he whispered, voice roughened by something deep and unguarded, "I will be grateful for it every day." A soft laugh escaped me. "That sounded dangerously close to sentiment, Your Majesty." He huffed. "Don't get used to it." We stood there, in the cold, moonlit courtyard, the world quiet around us, the future stretching vast and unknown before our feet. And for the first time since the night I ran from Fenric's fortress, I felt not hunted, not trapped, not lost, but home, truly home. The wind curled around us gently, carrying the faintest hint of spring despite the snow still falling from the sky. And Kyle's hand slid into mine, warm and steady. "Ayla," he murmured, "whatever comes next, will you face it with me?" I squeezed his hand. "I already am." And the wind whispered its approval, and the moon glowed brighter, and the kingdom, wounded, healing, waiting, felt suddenly full of promise. A new beginning. Our beginning. The true start of our story. Thank you for reading this story. I poured myself into every sentence, every moment, every breath between these pages. And now, I would love to hear from you. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, full of magic and emotion and long, tangled destinies, subscribe so you never miss the next tale. Your support keeps these worlds alive.